couple of weeks ago, I spent several days at a network gathering of some Texas MCC churches, which took place in Lubbock. It was a good time to renew old acquaintances and to meet new friends. I recommend it for anyone who is able to attend in the future. At the gathering, the presentations focused on different generations, what it means to be a member of these different generations, and the expectations each of them have of the church. It was really informative, and I want to share a little bit of it with you. First, there is what is known as the GI generation, people who are in their 90s. Not many of those around, but it's worth noting that they were influenced by World Wars I and II, the Korean War, the Great Depression, and the Dust Bowl. Consequently, they value sacrifice and patriotism. They tend to be frugal, and they have a cooperative spirit and a high regard for institutions. Next came what is known as the silent generation, who are in their 70s and 80s. They were influenced by rock and roll and the beginnings of the civil rights movement. They value things like the American dream, stability, conformity, and they generally have a respect for institutions. Both the GI generation and the silent generation tend to be lifelong church members and supporters. They are committed to the church, and giving is a part of their social obligation. Next is the baby boomer generation. I'm a part of that generation. We are in our late 50s and 60s. We have been influenced by Watergate, the Vietnam War, a poor economy, and rising inflation. Generally, we are inclined to define ourselves by our jobs and achievements, and we value personal fulfillment. Unlike our parents and grandparents, baby boomers hold very little loyalty to institutions. Giving is seen as a personal option, not an obligation. And when we do give, it's to support a mission, not to preserve an institution. Next, we have Generation X. They are in their late 30s, 40s, and early 50s. In contrast to previous generations, more Gen Xers have divorced parents, and they are characterized by higher rates of poverty and suicide. They were formed during turbulent times, and they want things to work again. And they embrace social diversity in race, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Generation X expects the church to live faithfully to its mission statement and to model sacrifice. The church should give to mission off the top, or don't expect members to do it. They don't give to meet a budget or to keep the lights on. They only give as a personal expression of their belief in the church's mission. And the last generation I'm going to mention are millennials, or Generation Y, who are in their teens, 20s, and early 30s. They are especially influenced by high unemployment rates. Consequently, many millennials are still living with their parents to try to make ends meet. Their sense of identity comes from belonging to a group. Fitting in is more important than standing out. Although they tend to trust institutions and they believe in collective action and social justice, only 75% of them identify with a religion. The other 25% of them are part of the millions of Americans who are no longer active in a religion. Those who attend church need for it to exhibit unity and community. Transparency and authenticity in the church are vital, and the church must not be resistant to change, and it must have an outsider-focused mentality. Millennials are described as people who expect the church to be authentic, to live out what it says it does. But I believe every generation has that expectation of the church. The difference seems to be that older generations are willing to stick it out and hang on, even when the church isn't living up to those expectations, while younger generations feel free to walk away from the church if it doesn't live up to their expectations. Authenticity of the church and religion is what Jesus was talking about in this morning's gospel reading. When his disciples were challenged for not living out the traditions of their religious ancestors, Jesus came back at them by pointing out that they made a show of being good church folk with their hand-washing rituals while neglecting the weightier matters of religion, things like those our first reading describes, caring for orphans and widows. In other words, Jesus told his challengers to quit playing church and start being church. I used to attend a church where the leaders complained that the community at large unjustly accused them of playing church. How could they be playing church, they asked. They certainly seemed to do everything that other churches did. They processed in their prayers at the beginning of each service. Their readings and liturgies were long and used ornate language. The pastor even sat up in front of everyone on what kind of looked like a throne. Not a whole lot of community involvement, but boy, they knew how to do Sunday morning church. But when I spent private time with the church leaders in the church office or at small social gatherings, it was slice and dice time. Gossip was the name of the game, and anyone who wasn't in the room was the target. Yes, they were indeed playing church, and I'm glad I'm not a part of that church anymore. They were guilty of doing the same sort of things Jesus accused his challengers of doing, heavy on the religious show of things while neglecting the weightier, more important things of religion, such as caring for your neighbor. This is the issue with which millennials are confronting the Christian church today. It's not that they aren't interested in being a part of a community of faith. They are. But they want that faith community to live fully into being an authentic expression of its mission and vision. I believe that's one of the reasons why Pope Francis is so wildly popular among young people. He appears to be authentic. He's walking the talk of the church. He lives out in his daily life what the church says to do. Someone recently expressed a concern about our need to attract younger people to our church, and we're going to end up being a part of the dying church phenomenon, which seems to be sweeping our country. I think Gen Xers and millennials are more concerned with our relevance than our worship style. So if we want to attract younger people, we need to embrace the values that Jesus insisted upon in this morning's reading. We need to be relevant to the community at large. We need to be caring for a broken world. So what does that look like? I think it's wonderful that our church building offers space for HIV and transgender support groups. I also think it's great that we operate a food pantry for people who are HIV positive. I think, though, that we can be relevant to the world in ways that we can only begin to imagine. We can do even more. And I don't think we can or should use church size, church budget, or an individual's age or physical limitations as an excuse for not expanding our mission. Anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Christians everywhere seem to be infatuated with millennial Christianity, but in many ways, millennial Christianity is simply a modern-day attempt at reconstructing the example of Jesus Christ. I believe we as a church need to think what that looks like for us. It's easy for us to look around at others who we see as just playing church and shake our fingers at them. But how are we being church? And what would need to change for us to fully live out the call of Jesus Christ for our church and our individual lives? I hope you'll join me in praying about this. Remain open to the Spirit's moving in and among us. And as we do pray and remain open, may God bless us in our endeavors to live out the call of being an authentic people, a people who truly loves God and shows it by caring for our neighbor. Amen.